Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Maureen Benson-Ray aho, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this panel session on growing Europe-New Zealand trade, opportunities in new FTAs, FTAs plural. And I'll be chairing today's session, welcoming our speakers, and then I will handle the Q&A in the chat function. So can I please encourage you to put your questions either for individual panel members or just general questions into the chat function, and then I'll ask them at the end of the presentations. Unfortunately, Hone McGregor, who was to be with us on the panel, has unfortunately had to be a last-minute withdrawal, so that might spread our time a little across the other speakers. So without further ado, I'll welcome, first of all, Claire Kelly, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where she is Assistant Secretary Trade. Thank you, Claire. We welcome your comments.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you to the organisers for the invitation to participate today. I'm going to focus my comments on New Zealand's FTA negotiation with the European Union, and I thought I would focus on three key points, which were the wider relationship context for the negotiation, and then to go briefly through our specific objectives for the negotiation, and then to move on to our progress to date. And we'll be very delighted to take questions whenever, Maureen, you think it's appropriate to do so. So I will try to keep it brief because there's a lot that can be said. So please forgive me if I move through my points quickly, but as I think everybody will know, an FTA with the European Union has been a top New Zealand government priority for years. Not just because the European Union is a very important trade and economic partner, but because of the depth and the breadth of the relationship that we share. We have historical, cultural, social, and family connections. I'm sorry, I can hear someone in the background. Just checking that you can all hear me well. Great, I'll keep going. Also, with the European Union, we're close and natural partners on most global issues. We have shared values and common perspectives on democracy, human rights, the protection of the environment. This has resulted in a long history of partnership and cooperation on global issues, such as maintaining peace and security and tackling climate change. So, and we both have had a policy for a long time that trade agreements can be very useful tools in ensuring high standards in those areas such as labour and environment and in relation to the climate. So it makes a lot of sense that we should embark on this the cementing of those shared values and our trade and economic relationship. Also, we think the conclusion of the EU-New Zealand FTA would send a clear signal about the commitment of both partners to the global trading system that operates on partnerships, rules and transparency, and reinforces that in preference to unilateral protectionism as we have seen in recent years. Of course, for New Zealand, it would also play an important role in our economic recovery from COVID-19. You'll have heard Minister Mahuta and others talking about how New Zealand has to have a spread of options and opportunities in the global marketplace and not allow those options to be narrowed or concentrated to an unhelpful degree. So that is our context. Also, that we are, as everybody knows, in this forum, we're a trading nation reliant on our exports, and we've successfully developed products for our market around the world. So it is a very natural extension of the position that we've, of the policy approach that we've taken successfully in the last 30 years of our trade policy. Another objective or another contextual piece of importance is that very like-mindedness, that degree of like-mindedness on the rules-based trading system. As you'll all know, the WTO unfortunately had to postpone its ministerial conference last week. I was supposed to be at this moment emerging from MIQ, having attended that meeting. New Zealand and the European Union work extremely closely in that context. So that's all part of the context.
Sorry, Claire, you've been muted there.
So, thank you.
I think if everybody could just make sure that they have themselves on mute. I think it's people joining, not being on mute,
right.
that's causing.
Okay. Because yes, it wasn't. I did not mute, but presumably I'll go now and just. Simon, I can see you really clearly. If you could wave, if I mute again, that'd be helpful. So I'm not sure where we got up to, but anyway, I'll keep going. The geostrategic angle in this, of course, is that from New Zealand's perspective, is that we have recently concluded 2 mega regional deals in the Asia Pacific region: the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, and RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And these two very big FTAs help shape the trade rules of the Indo-Pacific region, but the European Union's not part of them. So we see our negotiation with Europe as a means for Europe to be more present in the region, and obviously that would apply with the Australia's negotiation with the EU as well, so that Europe is able to help shape and inform these rules in our region, and anchoring the EU, giving the opportunity to the EU to anchor very fully into the Indo-Pacific region. So that's the background to why we were so pleased to launch the negotiation officially in June 2018. And we have had 11 rounds since then, with a lot of really useful momentum. So I'll speak now to, just conscious of time, which seems to be going very quickly, to our objectives for this particular negotiation. The first will be very obvious to everyone. The European Union is a very important trading partner for New Zealand. That it is the home of 450 million, mostly high-end or high-value, as we would term them, consumers. The EU is our 4th largest destination for goods and services exports, and a significant source of direct investment. Our total New Zealand exports to the European Union in March of this year were around 15 billion New Zealand dollars, and that's even with a decrease in services exports, which is a function of the pandemic's impact on our economy. So there's a very clear objective for us there in improving our access into that really important market. And also another really important thing to think about is to level the playing field for New Zealand competing with some really key competitors in the European market. Chile, for example, has a free trade agreement with the European Union, so is able to sell its kiwi fruit and other products with which New Zealand is a direct competitor without a tariff barrier. And I'm sure Simon will speak later on in more detail to some of our hopes and dreams around dairy market access in the European market. So it is New Zealand's objective always to, in all our trade agreements, to seek comprehensive tariff elimination for all goods. And we have a proven track record of some really good results in this regard, while being able to respect the sensitivities of our partners and provide that time for adjust that particularly developing country partners need in free trade agreements. And in this negotiation where, currently as it is, the European Union and New Zealand discriminate against each other in terms of the market access we give to each other relative to other countries. And obviously that's a situation that needs to change given the extent of our relationship. Trade in primary products, I think everybody knows the sensitivities of some EU member states in this regard. And what that means for New Zealand is that our producers face high tariffs and quota restrictions in the EU market, in contrast to the open access that European producers have to the other parts of the world, and in particular when exporting to New Zealand. So that is a long-term objective for us to improve that market access for our primary products in particular, but for all products in general. We do also see a particular opportunity with Europe in terms of the like-mindedness that we have shared for a long time around trade rules that I talked to before. The European Union has a commitment to a progressive and inclusive trade policy that benefits the widest possible scope of its citizens, as do we. We call our policy trade for all, and coincidentally, so does the European Union. So we are really like-minded in that regard, and we, from New Zealand's perspective, we want the FTA to deliver for all, including women entrepreneurs, the Māori economy, SMEs in our regions. And so we think there's a particular opportunity with the European Union to see if we can set a new benchmark for provisions relating to sustainable economic development, promoting high labour standards, high environmental standards. So that is quite an exciting opportunity. So moving on to where we have reached in our negotiation, I think I mentioned earlier that we've had 11 rounds of negotiation. And I think it's fair to say that we've made a lot of excellent progress, but the road ahead to conclusion is going to be a busy one. We received a revised goods market access offer from the European Union during our last round of negotiations, which had made some important improvements for New Zealand products, such as kiwi fruit, apples and onions. But there's still some way to go to see improvements in key products. So we are working in that space, and we will be looking to have a next round of negotiations in the first quarter of 2022, after which both sides will take stock and agree to a process for the rest of the year. And just to finish up and pass the floor back to Maureen, just before I do that, you will have heard ministers talking about the degree of ambition we have for this agreement. That is, this is a really important opportunity, and we need to get it right in terms of our levels of ambition. And so that means that we will stay the course in order to get a really balanced negotiation and an outcome that benefits us and the European Union and sets the framework for consolidation and expansion of our trade agreement for the years to come. So I will leave it there. Thank you, Maureen, and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That really sets the scene well for our panel. The next speaker is Simon Tucker from Fonterra, where he is Director, Global Stakeholder Affairs. Thanks, Simon. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Maureen, and kia ora tātou. Fantastic to be here, and a real pleasure to join my fellow panelists and to follow on from that excellent framework that Claire has laid out. I think up front, from a business perspective, high quality free trade agreements eliminate tariffs, non-tariff barriers, create a level playing field, reduce costs for consumers and customers, and they support commercial trade and investment opportunities, obviously. For Fonterra, they also support optionality and help us manage geopolitical risks. So we have a track record of seeing this being borne out by several comprehensive free trade agreements that New Zealand has done. And I think, they have tended to be in Asia in recent decades, but I think we're now in a position to replicate that success with New Zealand's trade relationships with Europe. Let me start just by touching on the UK, the recent agreement in principle on the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. You know, this is an extremely high quality deal with 98% of New Zealand's current exports able to enter the UK with entry into force of that agreement, and even dairy, which, you know, we understand is often sensitive, all tariffs are eliminated within 5 years. And as I say, this is an outstanding result. It's going to create new opportunities for New Zealand exporters in a high value market with consumers and customers who are willing to pay for New Zealand provenance, our sustainability credentials, and our innovation. I think for a business like ours, it's also going to allow us to deepen and expand our partnerships in the UK. For example, we already have a very successful partnership with Saputo UK, where we leverage our IP and technical expertise and also our channels through the UK into Asia. And I think the more we can do high quality deals like with the UK, the more we'll be able to open up global value chains to the benefit of New Zealand companies, but also for the companies in countries like the UK. And we certainly see opportunities for helping to develop deeper relationships between the UK food industry and the Asian consumers and customers through this FTA. I think, and Claire's touched on this, but this FTA also delivers high quality outcomes in areas like trade and the environment, gender equality and labour. And while details remain to be agreed, there's also a dedicated chapter for cooperation on a range of issues important to Māori and to Māori business. And I think these sort of elements provide the basis for a genuinely progressive trade deal. So that's a great success. It's historically important. We're delighted, and you know, I'd like to really congratulate the negotiators on both sides for what they have delivered. Let me turn now to the subject that Claire's already introduced very comprehensively, the European Union New Zealand Free Trade Agreement negotiation. Harry White, you can put yourself on mute. Thanks. There we go. Thank you. EU New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, and I think segueing from the UK to the EU is quite a good one, because I think the UK FTA certainly establishes the sort of benchmark that Fonterra would like to see follow through. Like the UK, the EU also has high levels of dairy consumption. It's got discerning customers and consumers who value the quality, innovation, provenance, and sustainability credentials that are core to Fonterra's strategy. As a business, we already have significant investments in the EU, and these enable us to source high quality dairy ingredients and products there. These investments add value to the European milk pool and to Fonterra's global value chains for the benefit of farmers both in Europe and in New Zealand. A good example of that is our partnership with Aware in the Netherlands, where we manufacture whey and lactose for our functional nutrition business, but we also source UHT cream and mozzarella for our global food service business. So all the signs should be good, but unfortunately, and I think again Claire's touched on this, progress in this free trade agreement feels frustratingly slow. We are extremely disappointed with the quality of the market access offer that we understand Europe has made. A New Zealand cabinet minister described the offer as paltry. I think that's probably at the polite end of the spectrum of how I might describe it. You know, the reality is the EU produces 8 times more milk than New Zealand and is the world's largest and a very competitive dairy exporter. With flat to declining milk in New Zealand and strong demand for dairy across the globe, there's absolutely no reason really for dairy to be considered sensitive in this negotiation. And I just don't believe it's credible for the EU to continue to hide behind one of the more protectionist frameworks in world dairy trade in that situation. I mean, in our view, the role of FTA should be to create this level playing field, to eliminate tariffs and non-tariff barriers and enhance commercial trade and investment opportunities. This is the objective we all signed up to. But unfortunately, what's on the table is nowhere near delivering that or any basis for concluding the negotiation. I think it's fair to say that at the same time, the EU is almost refusing to talk sensibly about market access. There's the issue of geographical indications that they continue to push, where they want exclusive rights for common cheese terms such as Parmesan, feta, gorgonzola, mozzarella. And I think, these are cheeses that have been produced around the world in New Zealand for decades, in some cases for over 100 years. And I think any limit on our ability to use these very commonly traded terms would have significant commercial implications through loss of sales and undermining years of investment in R&D, manufacturing and branding. And this would come at a cost to our customers and consumers, both in New Zealand and around the world. So I think overall with the EU FTA, while it just sort of feels unfortunate that despite decades of demonstrating the benefit of open markets, we currently feel like we're locked in a sort of trench warfare type situation, inching towards some sort of unsatisfactory compromise. And I think the real opportunity here is to negotiate a new generation free trade agreement, which is progressive, not just in terms of commercial quality, but also recognise the importance of issues such as climate change, environmental sustainability, Indigenous rights, and addresses world-class standards on issues of consumer interest, such as animal welfare and labour. For example, as the producer of the lowest carbon dairy products in the world, Fonterra would be keen for New Zealand and the EU to work together to create objective science-based standards and measurements that could inform, for example, as the producer of the lower multilateral consideration of these issues. We should also see the opportunity for a broad-based agreement to build collaboration between companies and farmers on things like emissions reduction. Our company target to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 is a real, there's a lot of work to be done. And to support this as a business, we're increasing our R&D spend by 50% by 2030. And this will include looking at solutions to the global challenge of biogenic methane. We intend to invest up to $1 billion in sustainability initiatives across our supply chain over the next decade. So these are the sorts of opportunities where I think a high quality free trade agreement could promote collaboration and would be very much to the advantage of European Union food industry and New Zealand food industry players. We also see further opportunities for our respective dairy sectors to collaborate on issues like on-farm productivity, water quality and animal welfare. We have much in common with the EU in these areas, and a high quality FTA could help drive meaningful cooperation. Now, look, I think we all understand and accept that high quality FTAs take time, and certainly if we were choosing between quality and speed, we would always go for quality. But I think it's time, and I look forward to a clear signal from the EU that they're actually serious about completing this FTA, and an FTA that is genuinely trade liberalisation and establishes progressive and imaginative ways to further the partnership between New Zealand and Europe. So let me conclude by repeating congratulations on the outcome of the UK and NZ Free Trade Agreement. And I hope by perhaps the next ATEP conference, we might be back celebrating the conclusion of a similarly high quality progressive free trade agreement between New Zealand and the EU. So look forward to questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Some robust comments, but we'll have some good discussion, I'm sure. So it's my pleasure to introduce our third panelist, Marcus Driller, who is from Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, where he is Vice President Corporate. Thank you very much, Marcus.
Thanks for the introduction, Maureen. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everybody. I've worked with Fisher & Paykel Healthcare for the past 12 years. In my role, I look after our global legal, investor relations, communications teams, as well as being responsible for government relations and community involvement. So when the name Fisher & Paykel is mentioned in New Zealand, most people think we're making dishwashers and washing machines, but that's not us. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare make medical devices that are used in hospitals and homes in more than 120 countries around the world. The brief I've been given today is different from Simon and Claire, and it's not to talk about free trade agreements. It's for us as a medical device manufacturer, we are subject to very few tariffs around the world, some in Latin America and India, and that generally occurs because healthcare systems are funded by governments, and governments often end up paying the tariffs. So there are a number of other very important aspects to trade, and I've been asked to touch on a few of those things today, and which have helped to create success for Fisher & Paykel Healthcare in Europe and around the rest of the world. So our business started from a prototype humidifier. It was made out of this AG jar, a fruit preserving jar, back in the late 1960s. Rumour has it that the maker took this from his wife's pantry and made the first prototype humidifier. We've come a long way over the years, but we took that first prototype and the first device was sold in 1970. But the first 10 years were a real struggle for the medical division of Fisher & Paykel, and the board became really concerned as costs were climbing, but sales weren't. And there's a long remembered story about the two founders of Fisher & Paykel, Sir Wolf Fisher and Maurice Paykel. And every board meeting over this period, Sir Wolf would say, I think it's about time we stop this medical division. It's going nowhere. And Maurice would keep saying, oh, look, let's just give it another month and keep going. We'll see how it goes. And after 10 years in 1980, we sort of had a significant breakthrough order from a customer in France. So we've got a lot to be grateful for to Europe, and the rest, they sort of say, is history. The appliances and healthcare businesses separated in 2001, and Fisher & Paykel Healthcare are now the largest company by market capitalisation on the NZX and the world leader in respiratory humidification. Last year, our products were used to treat more than 20 million patients. A number of those were COVID patients, and our global revenue was almost $2 billion, 633 million of which was from Europe. So I guess the first point I'd like to make is that successful trading relationships and successful businesses in general take persistence and a long-term view. And we have a saying in our business that we are not afraid of the hard road. Absolutely critical to our success in Europe has been the team of local people in each of our main markets. Our approach initially back in the 1990s was to send a Kiwi from New Zealand to go and live in market. So Paul Shearer, who's our Senior VP of Sales and Marketing, went with his family and lived in the UK and France and helped set up our offices there. And he was heavily involved in ensuring that we were hiring the right people in market and ensuring that our culture was passed on and promoted. Today, we have about 380 Fisher & Paykel Healthcare employees in Europe, based in 23 European countries, including UK and that. I'm not sure whether that's politically correct or not, but while we initially had a Kiwi to go over there and establish it, we believe the core part of our success has been hiring locals, whether that was in France, Germany, Spain, or more recently in countries like Poland. And those local people, they speak the local language, they understand the different intricacies of each market and the nuances of the healthcare system. Also, importantly with Europe, given the time zone difference, there's no working day overlap. For those of you who work with Europe will know the challenge that is. We've had, to build a trusted management team in Europe who can deal with the day-to-day interactions, not feel like they need to wait to hear from New Zealand overnight as to how things can be progressed. So I guess that second point is the importance of hiring good people in market who are aligned with your culture. The third and last of my points is probably best explained by a more recent story. In January last year, we started hearing from our people on the ground in Wuhan in China that there was this coronavirus impacting patients, and we saw a spike in demand. Immediately, we stood up our crisis management team, and we started seeing incredible demand out of Lombardy and Italy, and then on to New York and the US. And what we saw in the early days of COVID was patients being intubated. So they would receive an endotracheal tube down their throat, and they'd be attached to a ventilator. Often they would use one of these devices here. This is a humidifier. This is the later version of the prototype that was developed back in 1969. So what they were finding though was these patients who were being intubated had very poor mortality, so very low survival. And physicians were starting to ask, well, what else can we do? What else can we use to treat these patients? And this is where a therapy that we have developed over many years called Optiflow, nasal high flow therapy, came to prominence. And you can see over here, this is a Optiflow nasal high flow cannula. You've probably seen these in the media. I saw a woman in Waikato Hospital who was wearing one of these just this week. This delivers high flows of air and oxygen to patients who are struggling to breathe. And if you're admitted to a hospital with COVID-19, this is often now the frontline therapy. Last year, we treated over 7 million patients with this therapy. We didn't, hospitals did, but they used our therapy. This didn't come about though by accident, and the fact that this therapy was able to be used at such a crucial time was because of the hundreds of studies that have been performed over the past 15 years by physicians around the world, but many of these key opinion leaders, these doctors, have been based in Europe. And the fact that these doctors completed these studies and these clinical trials is largely due to the strong in-market relationships that our people in Europe have built. And these studies have been published, two key studies have been published by doctors in France and in Spain. Our European team have become trusted advisors who have helped the development of this body of clinical evidence. So I guess the third point that has been so crucial to our business in Europe and ultimately the rest of the world has been the importance of these strong in-market relationships that have been built. In closing my prepared remarks, I guess I'd just like to acknowledge the excellent work of MFAT in helping New Zealand negotiate free and open access to many markets around the world. Free trade agreements are crucial, and we have benefited as a result, so thank you. I'd also like to remind the audience about the three things I've talked about: being persistent, taking a long-term view, the importance of building local skills, and developing strong market relationships. So kia kaha, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. So now we'll turn to questions for our panelists. There are several coming through. I think the first one would be for you, Claire. Francis is asking, how is progress tracking on the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter? And then there's another question: what place will the Pacific have in this FTA, specifically with EU overseas countries and territories in the region?
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Francis and Cecilia. I'll start with Francis's question because I think it's a little more straightforward. We have high ambition for the chapter. We think it should include commitments to reform environmentally harmful subsidies, and we have quite a broad definition of what they are, and to advance efforts to promote climate change, combat illegal trade in wildlife and illegal logging, and promote sustainable management of marine fisheries. We also want an ambitious outcome on fossil fuel subsidy reform. So we were delighted when the European Union agreed to co-sponsor our initiatives in the WTO in that respect. We saw that as a really good indication of direction of travel. Removing fossil fuel subsidies for consumption alone would lead to the reduction of global emissions by between 6 to 8% by 2050. That's obviously not just between the European Union and New Zealand, but it gives you an idea of the scope of what can be achieved with sufficient political will. We also want the TSD chapter to be enforceable through FTA dispute settlement. including the application of financial penalties and sanctions where there are breaches, as is the case for the rest of the FPA, and which is our practice in the CPTPP. So our ambition is high. Obviously, progress is contingent upon overall progress, but we think that we're making reasonable progress in that regard, and we're continuing to think that we can achieve ambitious outcomes in the agreement. Turning to the question about the place of the Pacific in this FTA, I have to say I'm not really sure what this, I mean, obviously it's an agreement between New Zealand and the European Union does have overseas countries and territories as part of its composition. So in that respect, and Pacific territories will benefit from the outcome of the agreements in both directions. In terms of if you're asking about specific rules being negotiated in respect of relating to the Pacific, I don't, that's not a specific part, a focus of the agreement that I'm aware of. But obviously over time, once an agreement is in place, what we have found in the past is once you have your trade and economic relationship anchored by a free trade agreement, the extent to which there is cooperation and common ground just grows and ends up in many instances covering areas that you would not have thought were necessarily within the initial confines of a pure trade agreement. So we will just have to see where that goes in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I'll give you a short break. There's another question for you on New Zealand labour laws, but I'll go to Simon first and then Marcus. What advice would you give to early stage exporters? What type of internationalisation support would you rank the most effective? Start with you, Simon, and then go to you, Marcus.
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. Good question. You know, my personal view is there are really significant and excellent resources available from government to help small exporters. I think New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade both have clearly in their accountability to assist. So that would very much be my direction. And I think they both play a pretty key role. I'm somewhat biased, but you know, MFAT has got excellent insights into local economies, effective ways of doing business, risks that may exist in particular markets, and certainly specific advice around market access arrangements for their products. And NZTE provide a pretty remarkable end-to-end service for companies they work with. So that would be my first gap. I think the other thing is peer support. Fonterra can be a bit of a giant in the room sometimes, but we work with a bunch of smaller companies in a collaborative way, particularly offshore in key markets where we try and actively participate in local business councils and groups where New Zealand companies supporting New Zealand companies.
Thanks, Simon. Marcus, any thoughts or comments from you, please?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Svetlana. I think I'd agree with everything that Simon said. We've found NZTE very, very helpful over the years as we've established new offices in different parts of the world. I guess the advice is that it's probably going to be hard going, and then that reiterating the it takes persistence, it takes a long-term view. We think it's important to be in market, whether that means you going individually or someone from your team going initially, making sure that you're working with the right partners, or if you get to a stage where you can employ the right people in market, is really key. But Fonterra has been very helpful for us as we've gone into different parts of Southeast Asia, just reaching out for, who's a good law firm to help with getting set up, and I know that, if anyone wants to touch base and ask for recommendations of advisors in different countries, we're happy to share our experience as well. We were much smaller and we're very grateful for the support we've had from Fonterra. I think that's a great thing about New Zealand, the camaraderie that we do share in that sense.
Thanks, Marcus. Definitely that New Zealand Inc. approach, isn't it? We've got a question from Alison, and I think this could go to all of our panelists. I'll invite Claire to comment as well. How will the EU-UK FTAs impact New Zealand labour laws and supply chain transparency standards, given that New Zealand has no modern slavery legislation? Marcus and Simon, you might be able to comment on your supply chains, and Claire on the labour standards content in those two FTAs. So either of you, Marcus or Simon first?
I go first this time, Simon?
Thanks, Marcus.
So I can steal all the stuff you were going to say. As a global business, we're subject to global regulations around supply chain. We're in favour of New Zealand coming up with our own supply chain standards. So I know that a number of companies have got together to try and promote that, New Zealand-based companies. We think that it is absolutely fundamental that New Zealand be seen as at the highest echelons and the best practices from integrity throughout the supply chain and in labour practices. So we do a number of those things ourselves. So as part of our supply chain practices, we are, it's been a bit more difficult the last 20 months not being able to travel so much, but we're doing audits of our suppliers, particularly in areas which we have designated as sort of higher risk of modern slavery and those issues.
Yeah. Simon? Yeah,
no, I would echo that. I think Fonterra's position is very similar to Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. We have 10 or 11,000 employees around the world. We're active in at least 130 markets. We have really tens of thousands of suppliers around the world, and this is something that we've really taken seriously. We're involved in conversations here in New Zealand, but around the world, and we have clear policies and practices. I think it's the right thing to do. I think the interesting thing, and I guess in a way Marcus has sort of touched on this, is where we see our future is very much selling New Zealand provenance. And when we think about what New Zealand provenance is, it's about quality, it's about safety, it's about sustainability. But I think there's also a big people component about the way Kiwis do and should treat people, and the global image that New Zealanders have. And I think that being seen to be in the right place on these issues is so it becomes almost a sort of a commercial element to it, without being too transactional about it, as well as being obviously the right thing to do and consistent with our purpose as an organisation.
Absolutely, thank you, Simon. Claire, I'll invite the last contribution from you on those labour standards, and perhaps you might also touch on Lily's question about gender and exclusivity as it relates to all those people issues, perhaps.
Thank you. Just to say, I think Marcus and Simon have set out very clearly what's in it, if you like, for New Zealand in having very strong, robust, internationally consistent labour provisions with its key partners, especially partners with the EU and the UK, with which you can set really high ambition and expect a lot. And so what we have agreed in our agreement in principle with the EU, with the UK, apologies, a set of high standard labour laws. They also preserve policy space for New Zealand to keep on developing its own domestic regulation in this regard. And I see that Alison's question mentions modern slavery legislation. MB is undertaking a comprehensive piece of domestic policy development and consultation on that subject. And so where we have the direction in which we're heading in our EU agreement and in which we've settled in our agreement in principle with the UK permits us to go on developing those policy frameworks. I'm afraid I can't see the question on gender. Would you mind repeating it, Maureen, please?
Well, it was just that what role there is in the negotiations for clauses on gender and exclusivity. We're actually running out of time, so a quick word if you can, please.
It is, we do seek chapters on gender in agreements as a matter of course these days, and have made a great deal of progress in that regard. All the information, there's comprehensive information on the content of the agreement in principle on the MFAT website, and that will tell viewers in quite a bit of concrete detail what we've achieved in respect of trade and gender in the UK agreement, what our objectives are for the UK and other way around, sorry, the EU and others.
Very good. Thank you very much, Claire. So we're on 11:30. So it's my great privilege to thank our speakers very, very much indeed. Some very insightful comments. I think some of these conversations can be continued during the policy school. I would like to thank the audience and participants for sticking with us in our resilience on this conference platform. The organizers have asked me to let you know that there's now a 10-minute break and to ask you to rejoin the conference platform at 11:45 for the session on supply chain challenges. And once again, I'll thank you all very much indeed for your participation. Have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.